Yo, what's good? My name is Vivianne Castillo, and welcome to Real Talk. And this is a brief segment on the Choose Couraging podcast where we answer real questions from people building things or from folks who are thinking about it, and answer questions from inside the mess of entrepreneurship, okay? So no hustle hype, no polished, I figured it all out stories. Sometimes these questions are things that y'all send to us. Sometimes these are questions that we're asking ourselves right now. Either way, this isn't about doing business right. It's about doing it with courage, with clarity, and with care. So if you're navigating uncertainty, if you are rewriting the rules that you have been handed, that have been passed down to you, or maybe you're just quietly wondering if there's another way to build, earn, and live, then you're in the right place. Today, I'm joined by my friend and fellow entrepreneur, Vincent, and we're going to get into it. All right. So our question for today is, what career narratives keep designers frozen in place? I know right now I see on LinkedIn, I see it in my DMs, conversations I'm having, that there are designers who are wanting something different. They're curious about what else is possible, but they just feel stuck. And so, yeah, Vince, I'm kind of curious, like what's kind of coming up for you as you hear this question around some of the different narratives that are keeping designers frozen in place?
Yeah, this question for me is one that I can relate to because I've had so many different pivots in my career. So I understand it fully. I actually remember the first pivot that I had and how I felt. And the one of the narratives that came up for me during that time was that I felt like I didn't know enough to make the shift. And what's funny about that, about saying that, is that it sounded like wisdom, right? But it wasn't. It's like I needed one more thing in order for me to make that shift, to make that leap, whatever it was. And at the time, it was me quitting my job. And I felt like I needed to know more information about the landscape that I was about to get into, or more about having a design practice and how to run it, et cetera. But the reality is that I didn't really need that. And I think that's one of the narratives that many designers tell themselves as they're, on YouTube, online, looking, reading different, reports or articles or listening to different people speak about things. And all of that is great. And they should get information so that they can move accordingly. But there is this concept, and I'm sure you know it very well, given your background, called the rival fallacy, right? Which is, the belief that once you reach a certain milestone, you'll feel settled and capable. But the problem with that is that a rival never really arrives.
Yeah.
You know, there's always another certification. There's always another tool to learn. There's always another portfolio piece to do first. And so waiting until having enough is really a subtle lie that I believe designers tell themselves that keeps them frozen.
Yeah, and I think too, it is something that makes us feel responsible when we
Mhm.
tell ourselves that talk track.
Yep.
You said wisdom, and yeah, it's like wisdom, responsible, but it's just another way to dress up fear. Like, really, at the
Yep.
core of this question is like, what are the ways that fear disguises itself and causes us then to not see what else is possible outside our current situation and circumstance? Like, that's a
100%.
lot of what I'm hearing.
Yep. 100% fully, and as it relates to fear too and responsibility, there is this other narrative that correlates directly to that. And this idea that stability, staying where you are, is the responsible choice, right?
Mm,
Responsibility is real. Bills are real, but the responsible thing oftentimes get recruited into service of that fear that we so often stop interrogating it, right? We just kind of let it settle. And I find that, for most designers making the sort of responsible choice, they're actually optimizing against the risk that they've never done the math on, right? So it's like this projection of, here are the things that are going to happen that might actually happen, that they are avoiding themselves of having to encounter in their mind first. And so ultimately what I'm saying is that they're avoiding the discomfort of uncertainty, right?
mm,
Which they've labeled as irresponsibility. But, staying where you are, that's draining your creativity for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. It also has a cost too. It just comes slowly and we don't oftentimes name it.
Yeah, and I feel like something else I'm seeing right now, especially in light of the current state of the industry, the job market, is this belief of, I should just be grateful to be here.
Mhm.
And it's a way to position this as like a privilege, right? Creative work, good pay, proximity to power, impact on these products. And while again, gratitude isn't like a bad thing, like I want to be very clear on that. But I think sometimes this narrative can turn into a silencing mechanism.
Mm,
No, it's the way that we talk to ourselves about like, well, I'm lucky, I'm just lucky to be here, and therefore I shouldn't want more. I shouldn't want better. Therefore, like I shouldn't necessarily dwell on what's broken. I shouldn't risk the seat that I've already worked so hard to get. And so in doing so, then I've seen gratitude become a leash.
wow. Yeah, that's good. That's true. That's so true. And also I think it's a reflection of how one perceives themselves, right?
Say more, say more, say
As it
more.
relates to their value, right? And
Yeah.
so if you are, if you are walking in this mindset of, gratitude without question, right? Then it says a lot about how you see your potential, how you see what you've collected and gathered over the years of you learning and you doing the work that you've done, right? And I think that underestimating our value is something that is wrapped up in this mindset of gratitude, right? It's that not realizing that if you've been in a place for 5 years, there are a tremendous amount of things that you've learned. If you've done work and you've collaborated, you've executed, there's a level of skill set that has helped to catapult you to another level that you might not even see fully. And so to say, well, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful to be here because not many people have this opportunity, especially if you have friends in the industry who are still looking for a job or who have been looking for a job or looking for an opportunity for years or months or however long, then it's very easy to rest in that space of being, you know, grateful and for where you are. But in the reality, if you recognize that it is time to shift and time to move, then you also have to recognize there's a tremendous amount of value that you have built over years that you have to see greater than the sort of gratefulness that you're resting on.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And for those who are like listening, I think everything like Vincent's saying, it's a really good reminder that our employers are banking on us to not fully recognize our gifts, our skills, and our abilities. Because to do so would mean that them moving the goalposts, them moving the carrot on the stick will no longer work on us.
Mm. I hope somebody wrote that down because that is that is true. That's it right there for
Yeah, and
sure.
so we have to like take these moments to remind ourselves that like we are far more valuable than these systems and employers will ever recognize us to be.
Yeah, man.
And some of you who are listening, and I've been there too, forgot my value and my worth.
Yeah.
And so I think some of these narratives are a reminder of that and challenge that. I know one thing that I really struggled with in terms of like a narrative that was maybe keeping me stuck in place. In the fall of 2024, I decided to publicly leave and walk away from the UX industry. And one of the kind of like the stories that kept me stuck for a while, because I felt it for honestly like the last like year and a half before I actually publicly did it.
Mm.
And I think one of the stories that kind of like kept me stuck was this belief that like if I leave, then I'll I won't be like as relevant or helpful or valuable, right? And I think like especially when your whole community, a lot of your friendships are built on people that you've met in the industry from doing this kind of work. it almost felt like, okay, if I step away from the UX industry and some of the work that that entails, then I'll be starting completely over. I'll be at ground zero. But the reality is I wasn't necessarily starting at ground zero. I was evolving on what I had already built.
Yeah.
And I think once I recognized that, I started to then break down some of the skills and the gifts and the abilities that actually got me to where I was. I'm like, okay, this is actually about like repurposing this. This is about taking these abilities and putting in a different space. This is about trusting that I can build a life, a career, an experience that is in greater alignment with me now that I have more clarity about what I actually want and need on in terms of the way that I live and that I do my work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as I'm listening to you share that story, I'm also thinking about another narrative that surrounds this proof of self, a proof of worth, right? To to be in this cycle of having to prove yourself to others. It's almost like this idea of starting over also comes with it this idea that you have to now prove yourself in this other area or in this pivot or this shift
Mm,
what to make, right? And no one wants to go through that cycle again, especially if you've had to do so in environments that were toxic, in environments where it was extremely challenging for you to show or to prove that you were valuable enough to be where you are, to do the job that you were hired to do. And so to think that you have to prove yourself to another set of people or to a different audience, I I think can also be paralyzing for many as well.
yeah. Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like we're having this conversation, it's making me think about I mean, there are a lot of variations of these narratives that we tell ourselves, and really at the heart of it is it's rooted in fear and in the unknown.
Mm,
I remember I was talking to someone recently, and they were like, "How do I get more confident in this particular idea in this direction that I want to move?" And I was like, you know, confidence comes from clarity. But
mhm,
clarity can only come from action. Like, it comes from trying, it comes from experimenting, it comes from making one step closer to the idea that you wanna explore, the life that you wanna live.
mhm,
And I think, like, a lot of us within our corporate experiences have been conditioned to equate risk with a close proximity to failure, but we
mhm.
see and treat failure like a bad thing.
Right.
So even in
Take
terms of,
more.
like even, like okay, so, like, even in terms of leaving
Yeah.
we're like, "Okay, if I leave this job, if I leave this career, it means that I failed."
Yeah.
And so but I think there are some unique things to the design industry and culture that shape this particular belief. Because I
Mhm,
feel like design culture, the industry rarely kinda, like, celebrates some of these exits from the industry because it's all about being committed to the user, being committed to helping people. And so we celebrate perseverance. We celebrate promotions and visibility, but not necessarily discernment.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so then I have witnessed a lot of people stay long past the point of what they needed to be in because leaving felt like an admission of inadequacy
mhm.
rather than an act of self-respect.
Ooh, that's worth repeating, I feel like. I honestly do. I feel like people need to hear that again.
Yeah, yeah. I said something along the lines of like people tend to stay past the point of where they needed to be because leaving feels like an admission of inadequacy rather than an act of self-respect.
Mm,
And when I think about some of these narratives that you and I are talking about, all the things that they have in common is that they can disconnect us from our agency,
mhm,
right? Like these narratives, they teach people to wait, to
mhm.
tolerate, to adapt endlessly instead of redesigning their own conditions.
Right.
But really, like, the truth is that movement doesn't mean instability. Change doesn't mean, regression. And choosing yourself doesn't make you less professional. If anything, it makes you more precise.
Yeah.
And that's actually like what a lot of us are craving this. kind of like this knowing, this like level of precision, right?
Yeah.
And so when I talk to a lot of designers these days, they're not necessarily frozen because they lack courage. They're most so frozen because they've been taught that staying still is actually the responsible choice, kind of like what you were
Yeah.
saying earlier, Vincent.
Yeah.
And so I think like unlearning that is a design problem that we need to tackle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's something else that I want to bring back up and I form it as a question to those who are listening. And that is when it comes to this fear of failure or being close in proximity to failure, the question I have for those who are listening is failure. If you're thinking about that, are you, when you ask yourself the question about failing and you think that you are going to fail in the eyes of whom?
Mm,
Who is the one that you think you're going to, is it you that you're going to, that you're failing, that you are letting down? Or is it someone else? Right? Is it your group? Is it you failing in the eyes of the people that you hold close? Your the folks who are in the industry who are looking at you? Is it family members? Being able to answer the question of who you're failing in front of is just as important as answering the question of what are you actually failing. Because I think what you're saying is that being able to identify and choose yourself and how you are essentially showing up in spaces and the refinement that you're able to do by choosing yourself and making the decision in terms of discernment, I think is much more value. There's much more value added to your sort of journey, the growth that you're trying to achieve. Cause I imagine that in this space within this question, there is this growth that designers want to have happen, that they want to be able to experience with when they make their next choice or their next move in their career, whether it's within the organization or it's outside of the organization. And I think that in choosing yourself to achieve that growth, becoming very honest about what this picture of failure looks like and to whom is something worth exploring. And I imagine that once you go down that road, because I've had to do that for myself, that you'll find that this story that you've told yourself about what failure looks like with making that pivot or making that shift is actually not as scary as you probably imagined, right? It actually really this almost like a small seed that has turned into this large mountain in the mind.
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so maybe the reframe is maybe it's not that you're feeling stuck. Maybe it's that you're underclaimed. Maybe the room hasn't frozen for you. Maybe you've just been protecting yourself from the discomfort of expansion. Like, what would happen if we allowed ourselves to dream bigger and think about a different way of approaching and like living life? Like that can be scary to like dream bigger. Like, what if things were different? What if they were better? What if they were healthier? What if I was able to actually make progress on this idea and make the right connections and relationships? Like, it's still scary because it's still a lot of unknown.
Yeah, it is. And I would say doing that, dreaming bigger or thinking bigger without comparison,
Mm,
because comparison limits our ability to be able to reach that level of thinking and dreaming because we now are using a litmus test that's not even real or not even where we don't even have enough information to even understand how that story is even has even came about, right? And so
mm,
being able to dream without the limitations of comparison is something that I would also challenge, designers to think about and to do and to explore. And that I think in and of itself would be a challenge because we're so conditioned to, I believe we're conditioned to to think about ourselves in comparison to others, in comparison to our friends, in comparison to others in the field, in comparison to our future self, right? But to be able to dream and to think about what does that life look like without that limitation of thought is powerful, and I think that becomes a driving force to many surprises that you might find for yourself in the
Mhm.
process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so I'll wrap up this with an encouragement to contribute more than you complain.
Mm,
Feel like there are a lot of things that, especially within the UX industry, designers, the like, there are a lot of things to complain about and point that are wrong and broken. But what if we contributed more than we complained? What if we contributed more to the goals that we have, the dreams that we have, the ideas that we have? What if we contributed more toward the relationships that actually like bring a sense of light and excitement in our life instead of arguing with some rando on LinkedIn?
yeah. Yes.
Like, or being mad that, some design leader again said something offensive and like laced with caucasity.
Mhm.
So the encouragement here,
Successful.
contribute more than you complain to you and to your ideas. Like we have such a short amount of time on this side of forever.
Yeah,
And we need to be better stewards of it, and we don't have to be stuck, we don't have to endure. It's
yeah,
just about identifying those narratives in our mind, those narratives that we're telling ourselves that are disguised as responsibility and
yeah,
disguised as wisdom, and recognize it for what it is, which is fear. But opportunity and change aren't scarcities,
yeah,
and but it does require us to see that there can be something differently done, that there are other possibilities out there, and to lean more deeply into that than what we are identifying as keeping us stuck.
yeah, yeah. And I would say also know that you're not lacking insight, right? You have insight in knowing what choices to be made next. And reclaiming your agency means getting honest about whether that peace that you're aspiring to have is, or that you are missing right now, is that hard won wisdom, or is it just very well defended comfort?